Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my lovely ones, and welcome to episode 166, where we are going to talk about a common dynamic that I see oftentimes in relationships, specifically relationships where there's one person at least who's a highly sensitive person. And I'm calling this dynamic the overfunctioning versus underfunctioning dynamic. This may be happening for you if you see or you feel like your partner is not contributing enough around the house or like domestically. So I'm going to help you figure out if this dynamic is happening for you, and it probably is if your partner isn't doing as much as you'd like around the house, and therefore how to help change this dynamic and get your partner to put in his fair share of domestic duties, right? Now, before we dive into the heart of the episode, I do want to mention and really bring us back to an essential point of focus, which I think I've been reminding you of more lately, which is that the best work you can do in your relationship is always going to be on yourself, in your own mind and your own heart and on your own actions and on your own way of relating to your partner, right? Your relationship work should not be primarily focused on changing your partner. Yes, of course, it's important to ask for the things you want and even to ask for the shifts you'd like to see your spouse make. Totally. But I'd say that about 90% of the work involves, like the work to make your marriage what you want it to be, involves shifting what's going on inside of you and how you show up in the relationship. And only about maybe at most 10% is about asking your partner to change. Now, I would say the same to your partner if I was talking to your partner. So this is for both of you if you're doing your own work, but your job is to do that 90% of work that's purely on you. And the beautiful thing is that when you focus on changing yourself and communicating and relating to your significant other in ways that generate the deepest connection and love and teammanship and really the most fulfilling intimacy, your partner 99.9% of the time is also going to change how he shows up with you in response to how you're showing up. Because dynamics between you change when you change the patterns you show up with, right? When you change your patterns of interactions. And those patterns of interaction change when you change your underlying thought patterns and emotions, right? The stuff that's going on within you. And that really leads me to how this can be true with domestic life and running a household together. So I know that sharing the domestic load is important to so many of you. So let's talk about when he's not contributing, when your partner's not contributing enough around the house, and the underlying dynamic that is most often the cause of this. So my clients and women who take my courses and are kind of in my sphere, they often have complaints and feel challenged by how their partner shows up in their domestic life together. They feel like he doesn't do as many household things as she does, or he doesn't do them the way she does them. And of course, she'll often feel burdened, like a lot of the daily domestic work falls on her, or like she has to be the one to keep asking for stuff to get done, or managing the household, or noticing what needs to be dealt with, or she has to make up for her husband's lack of domestic capability by picking up his dirty laundry and putting it in the hamper, or doing the laundry because he always leaves it in the washing machine and it gets stinky, or by making sure the kids' lunches are packed for school because he's busy reading his phone in the morning, or she always has to make all the health appointments for all the family members, right? And on goes the list of things she does around the house and the things he doesn't do. So this is unfortunately really common. And I know that if this is happening for you, it really can feel unfair and frustrating and burdensome. And even like you aren't supported or don't have a full partner in your spouse. And maybe even like you aren't loved. I know it can really breed some real resentment and hurt. So I don't want that for you anymore. If that's happening, I want to help you shift it. And luckily, there's so much you yourself can do to even out this weight of domestic life and feel like a real team. This really is an issue that can be solved. And of course, as per usual with me, I have a lot to offer you to help you turn this around. And again, as usual, it starts with taking a kind but honest look at yourself, really your own role in this dynamic and the impact it has on your spouse and his reactions, meaning like how you the way that you handle things does have an impact on how your spouse reacts. So we want to look at that. And even if it seems like you have nothing to do with your spouse's lack of contribution, which I totally get, I know that it can really feel like that. But if you are over-functioning, as so many highly sensitive people tend to do, then your partner is likely under-functioning. Again, this is a very common dynamic in relationships, especially when there's an HSP involved. And it's not just one person's fault. It's not just your fault. That is very far from what I'm saying. And it's also not just your partner's fault, most likely. There might be some exceptions to that. Right? If the over-functioning and under-functioning dynamic is not the reason your spouse isn't contributing, then, it may be just his fault. But very often when we look, there is a piece of this dynamic going on. And both partners are complicit in creating this dynamic and maintaining this dynamic over time. So let's look at how this dynamic or pattern develops, because understanding that is really the first step to changing it. And then we'll talk about what you can do if you find yourself in this dynamic, and of course, how to reverse it. So here is how this pattern is born. You, at some point, probably early on in your relationship, you start doing a lot of things around the house because you like things neat, right? That's very normal for highly sensitive people. Not all highly sensitive people are really neat, but many of us are. So you start doing a lot of the things around the house because you like it neat, or you tend to get impatient for them to get done. Tell me about that one. Or you like tasks done to a higher standard than your partner tends to do them. I hear about that one all the time. Or you just are better at certain things like making appointments or organizing things. And you don't really trust him enough to do them as well as you do. Yeah? So then, if any of this is happening, you always do these tasks before he does, or you redo things he already did, like wiping the counter down because he missed a few crumbs. Yeah? Or maybe in the past, so this is another piece of this, maybe in the past you used to correct him or even criticize how he did things, or maybe you still do that. If that sounds at all familiar, any of this, you may be over-functioning. And after a few times of any of this, your partner may did start to unconsciously underfunction. He started sitting back and letting you take the lead on these tasks or just do them. This is when the underfunctioner is born. And this is not because he is simply lazy. If you think about it, when you're always stepping up and stepping in, he'll likely feel he's unable to do these tasks up to your standards, or he'll be fearful of feeling like a failure, and he won't be motivated to try to contribute in those ways because he knows he'll just fail again in your eyes. And so he'll simply step back and let you do it all. On top of this, when you don't actually give him a chance to do some of these things, he will never learn how or build enough confidence in himself to do them. He won't feel capable. And voila, this unconscious, silent agreement that you are the doer and your partner is the non-doer becomes more and more cemented. Right? And the more we do this, the more it becomes cemented. So for some of you, for many relationships, for many people in relationship, over time, this pattern gets more and more and more solidified, and it's been going on for years, and it feels just like the way things are, right? But as this happens, as this becomes a way, one of you is the doer, one of you is the non-doer, you start to feel serious resentment, right? You start to feel really burdened, and you even feel burnout, right? That's what happens to the doer. Not to mention that a sense that your spouse is more like your kid than your partner. And I know about that one. That one is no fun. And for your spouse, the non-doer, it can lead to feeling a lack of confidence, like he's not capable of many of the things that you do, and even that he's not so valued or respected, like he really is that kid you don't want him to be, and he doesn't want to feel like with you, right? So this is not a very fun dynamic for anyone. And I want to share an example of a client who came to mind, a client to whom it was very important to be a dedicated mom. And I'm sure many of you can relate. So what happened out of this desire to be such a good mom and like take care of her child really well, she spent a lot of time with her son. And from early on, she took charge of making his doctor's appointments and managing his schedule and his play dates and his extracurriculars and putting him to bed most of the time, right? And all of the things, most of the things. And as time went on, she started to feel resentful and exhausted and burdened and like, why isn't my husband helping me more raise this kid? Right? And she also felt sad. She was like he doesn't seem to have much of a relationship with his dad. So you can probably see it yourself as you listen to this story, right? He wasn't helping, not necessarily because he was just a lazybones, but because she didn't leave him much space to do so. And of course, it didn't just feel unfair to her, but it left her husband feeling incapable of being a good dad and disconnected with his son because he didn't get many chances to practice and build the skill of being a good dad. And over time, this became a vicious cycle because since he never built the skills of being a good dad, of parenting, she didn't feel she could trust him to take on more of their son's care. And so she'd continue to just do all the things, which reinforced the stuck pattern they were in. Luckily, when I helped her see this, like really see this, she realized she would need to change to allow the overfunctioning / underfunctioning pattern to dissolve. And as she did this with my support, her husband started stepping up more and gaining not just confidence with fathering, but also developing a stronger connection with their son, which was good for all of them. Because my client finally started getting more time and space for herself because she had less on her plate, and her son got a present and more engaged dad, and her husband got a better relationship with all of them and more confidence, right? So good stuff comes from dissolving this overfunctioning, underfunctioning dynamic. Now, I know you probably, as you're listening, you can probably sense or you're getting a sense that you might see this happening in other people you know's relationships, like your friends or your relatives' marriages, because again, this dynamic is so common, and it's especially common in the parenting realm. I think I see it there very often. But it's also shows up in other sort of domestic ways, of course, as well. And so if this is also happening in your relationship, and again, I urge you to really look and see if it is. I'm going to give you some more on that in a second. because it can be happening not quite as extremely or not nearly as extremely as this example, or even like some of the things I said, but even just on a sort of subtle level. So if you look and you see that it is happening to a small degree or a large degree in your relationship, you can change it. Yay, you can change it. So how exactly, what exactly can you do to change it if you find that it's happening in your relationship? Start with determining if you are indeed overfunctioning. So you want to not just take my word for it that you're overfunctioning, right? But instead, just take a real look, a real honest look to see if you are. And then we'll move on to addressing and reversing that overfunctioning if you find that it's happening. So that is the first step. The first step is to look and discover and admit if you are indeed overfunctioning. And we want to do that with kindness, right? This is not about judging ourselves or blaming ourselves or being harsh with ourselves. Absolutely not. It's just looking with kind eyes, with even compassion and love for ourselves. But it is looking honestly, totally honestly at ourselves. So if when you're totally honest with yourself, you answer yes to any of the following questions, you can safely say you are overfunctioning. And again, I want to say how common this can be for highly sensitive women because of various reasons. One of them is that we're so conscientious and we care about tidiness and we can have high standards, right? So it can lead towards this tendency to overfunction. Okay, so see if any of these, if yes is the answer to any of these questions. If you're being honest with yourself, do you have perfectionistic tendencies? Are you kind of a perfectionist? I made a whole podcast about perfectionism if you're interested in learning more. Do you or did you used to tend to redo your things that your husband has done, like refolding the napkins or rewashing some dishes or refolding the clothes that he folded first or whatever, right? Have you asked your kids or husband to load their dishes into the dishwasher? And then when they don't, do you regularly load them anyway? You see what I mean? Like, have you asked for a chore to get done, and then if it didn't get done within a certain short time frame, that you just went ahead and did it yourself? When you see something that needs to be done around the house and you know you could delegate it to your spouse or to someone else, do you tend to think, oh, it'll be easier and faster if I just do it? Even when and if you feel sort of resentful or burdened by it? I bet a lot of you are going to say yes to that one. Do you think your partner's overly sloppy or just doesn't do as good of a job as you do with many of the household tasks? So you just go ahead and do them instead of being annoyed and disappointed with his efforts, and then tend to feel like you're taking everything on and kind of resentful about it? Do you, in general, tend towards being a wee bit controlling? I admit this freely. Are you, in general, a bit fearful of things not being done correctly? Like, do you really not like it if things are not done correctly? Like, if it's messy or done, quote, poorly, will you feel agitated or be really distracted or unsettled? And so you don't let things be done poorly or incorrectly. You just go ahead and do them anyway. Did you used to ask your partner for help, but have kind of given up because it wasn't easy to get him to do things well or much at all? So if you've answered yes or sometimes to any of these questions, the chances are that you are overfunctioning at least somewhat, if not quite a bit. And what that's leading to is it's kind of like leaving the door wide open for your spouse to underfunction. And if you're like so many of my clients, you're going to feel, or you are feeling, annoyed, frustrated, burdened, and resentful at your spouse about it, even though you're complicit in this pattern, in this dynamic. So if you see this in yourself, it's good news. because seeing it is the first step to breaking this pattern and forging a whole new, better pattern, a pattern where your husband is contributing more domestically, and both of you are feeling more respected and supported and like a team, and you're no longer feeling like you have to take the lion's share on to keep your lives together functioning. So congratulations on looking at this in yourself and owning it, admitting it to yourself, because now you can get to work at dissolving this dynamic. Which leads me to step 2, which is decide to change your end of it. Decide to change how you do things. So once you've acknowledged your role in this issue, you can start to work on actively breaking this cycle. And this means to start doing these 5 things. Are you ready? You might even write this down. I'm going to just go through it super quickly. There's each one word, and then I'm going to describe what they mean. So these 5 things: decide, ask, trust, accept, and appreciate. Are you ready to hear what that actually means? All right. So the first thing is to decide what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do around the house or domestically, right? Like you can sit down. You can even just sit down and think about all the things that you'd like to not have to do anymore. And of course, what you're fine with doing. For example, you've heard me talk about my husband cooking dinner at least once a week. Well, I am good at cooking. I generally like it. And so I've generally been the one to step up and do that task every single day. But after a while, I started to get kind of bored of it, and it felt like a big job at it. I just felt like I was starting to get resentful about it. So I decided to ask my husband to take it on once a week. And I've also had my kids do the same at certain points. But it's not that I have to hate cooking to ask for help, right? And it's not like I have to ask for it every single night just because I want a little break from it sometimes. So I want you to do the same thing. Like, this doesn't mean you will never clean the bathroom, but if you generally don't want to clean the bathroom and you think that would be a good job to ask him to do, then decide on that, right? So seriously, sit down and make a list of these things that you absolutely don't want to do. You could also make a medium list, like a prefer not to do list. So that's that first piece here. Decide what you're willing to do and what you're not. The next thing is to ask. Ask for his help on specific things that you no longer want to do, or you think he may be able to get decent at doing, right? So this is kind of a little bit more elaboration on that last one, but really what I want you to do here is ask. Like, it's time to speak up and ask for that. So you can have a formal sit-down conversation about this, or you can just ask as these things come up and need to happen. And you can say something like this: would you be willing to start taking this task over? That would mean so much to me. And if this is true for you, you could also add something like, I know I've been kind of nitpicky in the past, but I trust that you can do it. And it would feel so supportive to me if you would. And even like, I'm going to let you do it your way. However you decide to do it, ask, but ask from a kind place. All right, next thing is trust. Trust him to get good at doing these tasks. Now, you may need to do a bit of teaching, but only after asking if he'd like tips and he says yes. Like, don't just assume he's going to be terrible at it. It's not a way to build confidence, right? But do say, you're welcome to say like, hey, if you want, let me know if you need any support or anything or tips, right? And it's important to know that he is not going to be as good as you are, most likely, at first. So please resist the temptation to fix or help or change what he's done once he does the thing. Yeah? Now, this can mean developing belief in his capability or working on believing that he's capable. At first, it can simply mean just suspending your disbelief that he's not capable. Meaning just trusting that he's going to get better, right? And as you let him fail and learn, he will get capable. And then you'll be able to really see and believe he's capable. Yeah? So another way of putting this is let it be a little messy. Yeah? This is how he'll learn. And when you can convey trust, he will be more likely to believe in himself and therefore actually be more capable. And to convey this trust, you can even tell him, hey, I know I've always taken over this in the past, but the truth is, I trust that you're capable to do it. Or you could even say, I'm learning how to trust you to do it well. So we're both learning. Right? Something like that can be really, really helpful. There's still a tendency in me to want to go in the kitchen when my husband's cooking and tell him how to do things. But mostly I keep myself away knowing that he's going to figure it out. Yeah, he might not do it just the way I do it, but he's doing it. And it usually turns out quite well as he's learned to cook, as he's figured out how to cook. And now I trust him to make me a nice dinner. It's awesome. All right, the next one is accept, which is kind of similar to what I was just saying. Accept that things might not be done exactly the way you would do them. Perfectionism is no help here. This can be hard to accept, that it might not be done just the way you like or up to your standards. And this is why I'm giving you a third step in a few minutes. So hang tight for that. But yes, acceptance is so important. Which brings me to the last piece here, which is appreciate your partner's efforts, even if they're not perfect. Providing this positive reinforcement is going to help him grow a sense of confidence and capability. And that's, again, going to make it easier for him to fully take this task on into the future. Right? So this appreciation thing, it's really like the carrot approach versus the stick approach. And studies show that it works better than the stick approach. Appreciating his efforts. So if he's done the chore or the task at all, or even attempted to, there is going to be something there to appreciate. So, appreciation can simply look like, hey, thanks. I really appreciate that you did that. Or even if he folded the laundry poorly or mixed up whose clothes, you can still say, hey, thank you for getting the laundry done. And, if you want him to see that he mixed it up, you can use some humor or something to throw it in there, right? There are ways to kind of make sure he sees that he didn't do it fully, or, without it feeling critical or like he's done something wrong. Okay, so as a reminder, those 5 things that I just shared are decide, ask, trust, accept, and appreciate. And I want to point out that the acronym for that is DATA, like ta-da, but backwards. DATA, a presto magic transformation, right? As you implement this DATA, your partner's very likely to stop underfunctioning, at least underfunctioning so much, right? And to finally start contributing more around the house and maybe even enjoy doing so. My husband likes cooking. It's fun for him. And this is going to allow you to have an easier time continuing to no longer overfunction, right? So as he starts to not underfunction so much, it's easier for you to not overfunction so much. So you kind of, as you start this process, it will help continue this process of dissolving this dynamic. And this is going to make your relationship one where it's more balanced functioning, right? It's balanced functioning that's happening from both sides. That's what we want. Now, I do want to say that this is not always as easy as it sounds to implement. As straightforward as these steps may seem, they really can be hard to implement, right? Because making these changes, including letting things be done differently or less perfectly than you would do them, can bring up nervousness, discomfort, and feeling like this unsettledness. And even really, we could call this a sense of not feeling so safe. And that brings me to step 3. Or maybe step 3 should really be step 1, but let's talk about it now. So step 3 is tend to your own internal safety. This is really meaning tend to your own emotional life. making these changes and getting to a place where you and your spouse are really working as a domestic team will mean addressing your fear and your discomfort, both at the level of your mind and your nervous system. Because it's not likely to feel so safe to make these changes. And if you don't know any other way to feel safe than to just keep falling into the old pattern, to keep relying on the old pattern, you won't be able to make better new patterns, right? So learning how to feel safe from the inside out is of utmost importance. And to explain this a little bit more, even though your overfunctioning pattern is exhausting and burdening you, it's been one way you've kept yourself safe. Because oftentimes it's a deeper fear that drives overfunctioning. Fear that things won't be just so. Fear that things will fall apart or not be good enough if you don't do them yourself. So to many of us highly sensitive people, it feels safe when we do all the things, when we take charge, when we make sure things are just so. But when we rely on that, it really keeps us locked into this very unequal dynamic in our marriages that really drain the juice out of it, right? That drain us, our own personal selves, of vitality, of love and joy, yeah? So to illustrate this, I want to share about way back in the day when my oldest was a newborn. And oh boy, what a day to be talking about him when he was a newborn, because tomorrow, as of this recording, tomorrow, I'm dropping him off at his first day of college. So I'm a little tender. Yeah. But anyway, way back when he was a new baby, I super overfunctioned. And it wasn't just like the first few weeks, it was like a couple years as a young mom. Because much like with the client I was talking about earlier, I was afraid, right? I overfunctioned because I was afraid my husband wasn't going to do as good a job with my son as I would. I was the only one who got up at night with him. Even when my husband kind of tried to at first, I wouldn't let him because I felt like my son needed me. And I helped my boy whenever he cried. And it made it so that I was, that first year especially, I was so exhausted. And I started to feel more and more resentful. Like, why isn't his dad helping? Duh, I wasn't letting him, right? And I think one of the problems with this is I didn't let my son develop a real relationship with his dad at first. Or his dad get good at being a dad, right? Just like with my client. So this is fear. This was from fear, right? And this is the source of why it's so hard to stop this dynamic. And this is why building safety is so important. Internal safety, an ability to guide your emotions, yeah? To not be caught in the fear and acting from that fear. So if you're an overfunctioner, what is that fear for you? It's going to be fear. Maybe it's that the house won't be clean enough if you let him take on some of the housework, since you like it really tidy. Or somehow you're afraid he'll let things fall apart. Right? So answer the question, what is it for you? What fear comes up for you when you think about letting him take stuff on? And if you really look at it, you're probably going to find that what you're afraid of is feeling a certain way. And probably that feeling is going to be something like unsettled or insecure or out of control or agitated, right? So that's what you're really afraid of, most likely. But when you know how to guide your emotions, when you know how to generate safety and ease and peace from the inside out, you don't have to rely on the external to be perfect or the external to be done really well. And this is why what I call emotional agency is so huge and so important. And it really involves guiding your thinking process and guiding your nervous system. Really, this is about knowing how to support your sense of safety at an internal level by supporting your nervous system into safety and your lizard brain, your brain out of that lizard brain fearful mode, right? And into a more trusting and relaxed place. This is why I talk about this sort of foundational stuff so much, this like emotional agency stuff, because this is the root of all positive change in our marriages, in our lives. It's very much about letting go of outward control and gaining inner emotional control. So I know, again, that this can be really hard for those of us whose unconscious strategies of protecting ourselves and staying well and safe have been about controlling our external environment. But the path to a real sense of safety isn't through controlling the external. It's about, again, developing that internal safety, right? And again, that's about guiding your mind and guiding your nervous system into these places of safety. Now, I've talked a fair amount on the podcast about guiding your mind and thinking, and this is what I do in depth with my clients. And I've talked a little bit less, although I've talked about it a fair amount as well, about guiding your nervous system, right? And this nervous system thing is a very important skill. I believe it's the foundation of emotional and relational well-being. It really is the very root of internal security and well-being and love and collaboration and all things good in your marriage, particularly when it's paired with your ability to guide your own mind and your thinking, guiding your own emotions, right? But it's actually being able to work with your nervous system and guide it into safety, ultimately, regulate it, in other words, is even more foundational, because you kind of need to be able to do that to be able to guide your mind out of those fear-based places and into the places that actually serve your marriage so beautifully. In other words, when your nervous system is regulated, it's easy to begin to guide your thinking in a way that makes your marriage wonderful and connected and all the good things. So being able to guide your nervous system in a basic way is not super complicated, but it does involve very specific ways of working with yourself that I have not taught much about here on this podcast. And it really is the direct path to deep emotional safety and a much better relationship, including more trust and cooperation with your honey. So that's why I've decided to offer something really special and different than I've ever done before. But it's very, very foundational. This is a 4-week live program with me called Foundations of Emotional Well-Being for HSPs, the root of better relationships. Now, it's a little ways off before we start. It's going to run in late November or early December, but I'm mentioning it now because I'm giving it to you for free when you become a one-to-one private client before then. Before late fall, early winter. So if you've been wanting to work with me, but you haven't reached out yet, now is a great time to do so, because not only do you get all the deep support and change from our targeted personalized coaching, where we do work on the mental and emotional aspects of internal safety, but you're also going to get this foundational course on the nervous system and the 4 extra live group calls with me that will really shift your nervous system and sense of internal safety at the very source into the best place. So if you sign up for one-to-one coaching by sometime in November, you'll get all of this. Now, the Foundations of Emotional Wellbeing course will be available for everyone then, but of course at a price. So combining this with one-to-one coaching is very much the best of the best for lasting upward healing cycles in your marriage. And right now it will be at no additional cost to you. So definitely join me in one-to-one coaching by going to the link in the show notes, or you can go to my website. I have a new domain name. It's www.hspmarriagecoaching.com, and you can go to that homepage and you'll see the Work With Me Privately tab at the top. So you can learn all about coaching with me there, and you'll also get a link on there to see the Foundations of Emotional Well-Being. Okay, so I do want to reemphasize that without this building up of internal safety, which we simply were not taught how to do or gain or be able to do ourselves, shifting this overfunctioning, underfunctioning dynamic is going to be a lot harder, if not impossible. So don't neglect this aspect of building this internal safety. You do not have to come do it with me, even though I'd love you to, but definitely do it. All right. So that is how you change this dynamic. This is how you get your partner on board, being more of an equal teammate domestically, at least how most of you are going to be able to do it. And you see how much it has to do with you shifting how you feel and do things, right? So you have so much power. I'm always saying that you have so much power to change things in your relationship for the so much better. So use it. I do have a couple last notes that I just wanted to make sure I shared with you. So know that as you change your pattern around this and you start to function at a better level for you, a more balanced level for you, you won't necessarily see an instant shift in your spouse. Like, I know I made it sound like that will just instantly happen, but the truth is your spouse might still feel unsafe or lack confidence in their own capabilities, right? So you may have to give your spouse some guidance or reassurance that they can do it, that you believe in them, that you will be okay if they don't do it your way. In other words, it can take time to rebuild or just build that trust and that sense of capability. But do have patience and stick to it. If you do, you're going to see things change and the weight of domestic life really start balancing out. Lastly, there is not a magic amount of, quote, functioning that is perfect. Like, what is over-functioning to one couple may not be for another. Right? What feels like under-functioning to you may not be to your friend. What feels like over-functioning to you may not be to me, right? So you have to find out what feels like the right level of efforting for both of you in your unique relationship. Like 50-50 is not the law of the land when it comes to domestic contribution. It really is not. But you can tell you found that balance. You can tell that there isn't a real true overfunctioning or underfunctioning misbalance when you both feel content and supported and like a team. Okay, that's what matters, not the exact amount that's happening. All right, so go get started breaking this cycle and creating a partnership that feels like a domestic team, because you are not a maid. You deserve to sit back and kick up your feet, knowing that you have a domestic teammate who's supporting your lives together, just like you are doing as well. All right, my friends, be oh so well.